How do we strengthen defense assets of India in order to counter China? The first and the most important thing would be India's military purchases. It would help India in providing a proper strategic deterrence towards Chinese forces and would help India in power dynamics that exist between both the countries. There have been several fractures in India's ties with the Chinese since the Galwan episode. We would analyze how the disengagement would take place in a three-part stage between India and China. The first one is the disengagement stage, and the second stage would be the diplomatic talks. Third one would be the process of de-induction. Today we are going to talk about the emerging strategic scenario between India and China and the mechanisms needed to contain this great power rivalry. There have been several fractures in India's ties with the Chinese since the Galwan episode has taken place last year in 2020. We need to look at how the strategic scenario would emerge in future and would provide a pathway for India to contain China and its adversarial nature. If we look at the historical baggage between this relationship, it has always been more or less hostile towards Indian interests. Maybe in 62, later in the 65 and 67 and 93, and several other confrontations in the border areas in Ladakh and in Arunachal Pradesh. The Chinese hostilities towards India are not new. We would analyze how the disengagement would take place in a three-part stage between India and China. The process of disengagement includes three parts. The first one is the disengagement stage, wherein military talks between the Indian and Chinese sides would be held. And the second stage would be the diplomatic talks, wherein the foreign secretaries and the national security advisors of both India and China would engage in a conversation. The second stage would be the process of de-escalation, wherein Indian political leadership would engage with the Chinese political leadership and would provide pathway for de-escalation of the matter. Once the de-escalation process is over, the military confrontation between both the sides would be radically reduced because the forces would be withdrawn from the boundaries and would be stationed in their original positions. And the third one would be the process of de-induction, where a stage of normalization would take place and the conflict would come to a standstill, and a scenario of status quo ante would emerge. How do we need to strengthen defense assets of India in order to counter China? This becomes a very important tool for us to analyze how the frameworks and the strategic thinking of India is at this moment and how it should emerge in the future. The first and the most important thing would be India's military purchases. The military purchases of India are important because it would help India in providing a proper strategic deterrence towards Chinese forces and would help India in power dynamics that exist between both the countries. Whether it's the purchase of Rafale jets, development of defense systems between both the countries, and the development of indigenous technologies in India through the means of DRDO and several other indigenous initiatives that have been taken under the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. The strengthening of India's defense forces and defense assets would be a key strategic deterrence that would act against China. And perhaps the most important aspect in this defense strengthening would be the strong investments in the human capacity building. Heavy investments need to be made in recruitment and training of our personnel and should be scaled up to a first world training standards. This would ensure that India and China would be on par to take on each other's forces, and the individual soldier would have all the technological know-hows of an advanced level in order to take a counterbalance against the adversaries at any given point of time. So when we analyze the wargaming that would take place in the future, we have a two-front situation that is being advocated by most of the strategic analysts in the country. What do they say? Let us look at how India and Pakistan would confront in a first front situation in the borders of the west, and towards the east is the Chinese. So what if both the forces cause trouble and conflict at the same point of time? It would be very difficult for India's military forces and the Air Force to scale up its productions, its defense assets and its personnel and deploy them at both the location at same point of time. It would be a huge strain on our national security assets, it would have a great threat that would destabilize India's national security. So an important takeaway from this two-front scenario would be that India should invest more in creation of military assets that would enable it to confront this situation. There are two initiatives that have been taken up by India. One is the setting up of the office of the CDS, the Chief of Defence Staff, which is currently being headed by General Bipin Rawat. And the second one is the theaterization of military commands, wherein the concept of jointness of forces of Air Force, Navy and Army have been completely integrated. This process has already begun, and a few years from now, theaterization process would be complete and would have strong impact on the adversarial nature of India's geopolitics. By managing all these scenarios, we hope that India would provide a strategic deterrence against both the Chinese and the Pakistani forces, and also emerge as a dominant military and diplomatic power in this region.